When you look at this robot, what do you see? And what about this one? The first one was kind of cute, right? But the second one, if you're anything like me, you'll find it incredibly creepy. So why is that? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. It's interesting, with robots and other things that look a bit like a human, our liking of them seems to increase as they become more human-like. So if I was to plot a graph with cuteness on this axis and how human-like it is on this axis, you'd find a nice gradual increase. No one gets emotionally attached to a Roomba, but if you start putting eyes and a smile on something, suddenly we start treating a robot more like a pet than a machine. But this only works up to a certain point. Once you reach this specific point of human-likeness, if that's a word, suddenly, rather than getting cuter, they start getting incredibly creepy. But if we could continue and make them so they were indistinguishable to humans, we'd suddenly start liking them again. So it's just this brief gap where we don't like these things. And if you look at the graph, it falls sort of like a valley. So it's known as the Uncanny Valley. And it's this area where the robots are sort of almost human-like, but there's just something that's not quite right about them. And we find this incredibly repulsive, disgusting, creepy, whatever you want to call it. So why would something that's almost but not quite human, and this can be a robot, it can also be a doll or a puppet, or maybe even clowns with their makeup, why does it cause this really visceral reaction? Well, scientists don't agree, but there are a few main theories. The first one is that it somehow reminds us of death. So it might be that something that looks human but isn't quite right reminds us of a dead body, a corpse, and that's something that freaks us out. And there are a few reasons it might freak us out. First of all, it might just be that it sort of reminds us of our mortality. It may be that we've evolved to stay away from anything that reminds us of dead bodies, because a dead body could make you ill. So it makes sense that our ancestors would have avoided anything rotten or dead animals, that kind of thing, because it could pass on pathogens. So it could be that this disgust response is actually to keep us safe from something that could harm us. A separate theory is that these kind of really humanoid but not quite human robots and other things cause what we call prediction errors in our brain. So perhaps you see something and initially you think it's a human or an animal, but then it behaves in a way that a human or an animal never would. And that kind of sets alarm bells ringing in your brain. To test this, some scientists showed people faces made of separate pictures so that the eyes were showing a different emotion to the mouth. And people found some of these in particular incredibly creepy, which suggests that this idea of something that's almost human but behaving wrong, causing this prediction error, does have some support. Or it could just be that anything that sits in this grey area that starts us wondering, is that thing alive? Does it have a mind? Can it think for itself? Is enough to set off this feeling of disgust and repulsion for us. And this might actually link into why so many people are scared of clowns, because clowns with their big drawn-on smiles appear happy, but then these expressions never move, which might be enough to trigger this response in us. These are all really interesting theories, but scientists don't actually all agree on whether the Uncanny Valley actually exists, let alone what might cause it. And yet there does seem to be a lot of evidence in kind of everyday life of people getting creeped out by robots, by dolls, by clowns, even by computer simulations in movies if they're too lifelike. So have you ever experienced this feeling? Is there any of these things that freak you out a bit? And do you have any ideas why that might be? I'd love to find out, so please do leave me a comment.